Previously on Tales from Tech Titans, how did you build your personal brand as the PMO specialist?
The brand building is about consistency.
Yep.
It's about listening. It's about honesty and integrity, which is key to me.
So if you're assessing, you're hiring, you're assessing someone to come into a PMO team, what are the kind of telltale signs that person's going to be a success? What are you looking for?
Adaptability, absolutely essential. Problem solving. The third thing I would say is ego aside. Another thing that often projects and programs do is they get told to take the contingency out. So even if their contingency is 10% or 20%, whatever it is, they're asked to remove that. Then they need contingency because something came up. But I don't think enough time is spent up front. And when it is spent up front, it's not with the right people.
PMO is a career, right? That's not really spoken about. So if someone wanted to go towards this career, where would you tell them to start?
I do think that having an administrative foundation makes a big difference. What do you often do when you feel stuck? It's a good one.
100%. I spent a bit of time living and running a business in Texas. And when I got there and someone explained to me employment is at will. It's at the will of the employer. And when you see on a TV show and they say to someone, you're fired, you can actually do that.
That's crazy.
Right? Which seems bonkers, especially in a country where you think all you hear about is lawsuits and people suing people and all this kind of stuff. But it's almost like the Wild West of employment. But it is, at the will of the employer. And I'm not saying that's right. People need to be protected because there's a lot of people out there that don't do the right thing. But there has to be flexibility.
Oh, there's got to be a balance, for sure.
So somewhere through that. God, I've got so many questions for you. Project programs often fail. Right? I don't know what the stats are, but the fail rate's pretty high.
Yes.
Right. And often I think that's in the eye of the beholder. By the way, that failure, because it's over budget or it didn't meet the needs or whatever that could be. But in your opinion, why do most projects fail?
I don't think they're set up to begin with right. I think they miss some of the essential elements at the very beginning, whether it's not being clear on what the scope of the program or project is to start with. And so it ends up becoming, I've got a program recently that I've been running that we thought we were doing this, but then we realized there's all these shortfalls in the organization itself. So we're starting to think about bringing those into scope, but they're not being treated that way. And so they were not thought through. So I think there's a challenge around scope areas. Communication. So when you look at sort of the statistic, I don't know what the number is. I think the last stat I read was something like 70% of projects fail, but people will challenge that. And I think they rightly so, because like you said, it's objective perspective. I mean, they ask thousands of people and then that person or people say, it fails because of, but communication is one of the biggest ones. So kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, but communication in what capacity? I'm not quite clear on that. I think from what I see personally in these projects is there are the scope creep, the timelines that are communicated at the begin are arduous. One of the things that happens a lot, particularly in the larger organizations, you have a separate team that does the strategy, the business case, and then they throw it over the fence to a delivery team. But the delivery team, who are the experts in the technology or the software or the change, haven't really had a chance to say. So then they reset completely what was originally baselined and approved, and then it becomes a whole new ballgame. And so based on that, the project is not going to meet what was originally intended. So I guess you could consider that a failure. So there's a lot of different reasons, but there's just I can't pinpoint one thing and say it's because of that. Yeah. And some companies, they don't understand what a project is, and they treat Valentine's Day marketing packages as a project. That's not a project. Yeah. So there's all these sorts of things. I think it really varies, but I can pinpoint different examples across different client bases or industries, but it varies too much to sort of pinpoint it.
And you often hear about projects, programs running over budget. I saw, just literally last night watching the news, and they were talking about maybe the Westgate Tunnel project, or there was some other project, billions overspent, or whatever project they were talking about. But I read someone talking about this last year. I think it was Scott Galloway, and he was saying almost every project in history has been under budgeted, and because people optimistic about what they can get done. But secondly, if anybody ever put the true upfront cost of what a project's going to cost to get done, most of them wouldn't ever get signed off.
100%. Yeah.
So you need to kind of put a figure up there that's palatable to get momentum going.
Yes.
and if it's got legs and it's kind of working and then it starts to go over budget, well, people are going to kind of get behind that.
Yes.
But it's almost not get upset or precious about that.
Yeah.
Factor that in.
And also another thing that often projects and programs do is they get told to take the contingency out. So even if their contingency is 10% or 20%, whatever it is, they're asked to remove that. Then they need contingency because something came up. Not only that, but the timeline from when you baseline a program and you define the business case to getting approval to actually starting to recruiting, that could be 6-9 months sometimes. So everything that you did, all the assumptions you had at the beginning and all of the estimations, etc., that probably changes by the time that lots of things change in that market, in that space. So I don't think enough time is spent upfront. And when it is spent upfront, it's not with the right people. And then when it gets thrown over the fence to those that are delivering, if they weren't engaged and embedded in the conversation at the beginning, they're of course going to challenge everything in that as well.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole governance element. So the PMOs that are working in these organisations, when they exist, should be there helping to alert to possible issues or risks or flagging when things don't seem right. And I think comparing what was happening the previous week or month to what's happening moving forward with real kind of insight into the reasons why will help to mitigate possibly going significantly over budget or a project failing. But I think also it's who's managing it. That's probably the other one that just comes to mind with recent clients, like 2, 3, 4 failures. A couple examples recently, I was brought into a test phase of a program to just effectively take over the PMO. It wasn't really a PMO. So we had to do it midway through testing. Now, testing for this large ERP program was months. And the program had 3 program managers. So they had got rid of the first one because it was a business as usual operations resource, no program skills. The second person they brought in was too, I guess, direct and didn't really work out and maybe didn't have the subject matter expertise. The third time it worked. And so sometimes the hiring is wrong at the beginning as well, the wrong people and in the wrong role. So I think capability, capacity, all of those things feed into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's another thing I think as well, a condition that has to be true in an organisation to be successful. And I think that's that kind of concept of psychological safety. If someone can't put their hand up in a project meeting and say there's some risks here, or the budget's blowing out, or there's feature creep, because they're fearful of the consequences.
Oh, for sure.
Of kind of blowing the whistle, so to speak. The project's going to fail, or that's going to happen down the road.
Oh, for sure.
So again, that's that kind of, you can use the word, I don't know, business maturity, psychological safety. It's the conditions that have to be in place to set these things up for success.
100%. I can tell you that we talk about the watermelon project, green on the outside, but red on the inside. Very, very common. And I've been in organisations where they've purposely told you, report everything green, even though there was plenty of issues simmering under the surface. Whereas in other organisations, they've said, tell me the red flags. Flag it red, flag it orange, because then we'll get resources and we'll get support to fix these things. So it's really dependent on how the feeling, like you said, like around how safe those people feel about raising these things. But as PMOs, we're not the ultimate decision maker. So we are guided by what the management team tells us to do. Even though you might not feel comfortable with it, sometimes you have to push back.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely. I also read recently you outlined how, I want to get this right, how PMOs need to evolve from sort of traditional project oversight to enablers of transformation. And I was kind of interested, again, talking about like skills of PMO professionals. How do people prepare for that? How do they kind of push themselves or create those opportunities?
So I think staying on the pulse in terms of what's happening in industry. So there's a lot of shifts at the moment happening, and there's a lot of discussion and debate around how PMOs can inject agility, not necessarily agile, but agility into the way that they work.
Yeah.
But then people say, what is that? What exactly does that mean? So I think it's like understanding what is happening in the industry around you and, being connected in terms of what others are doing, seeing, saying, attending events, etc. But it goes back to sort of my early point around the key part of evolving and supporting those transformations better is by understanding what the strategy and the strategic objectives are that you're trying to meet.
Yeah.
Working better and closer with delivery, and then bringing in operations. Operations is the key part that most PMOs will neglect. Almost 9 times out of 10, if not more than that. And I think if you bring the 3 together, you're more likely to go away from what's considered traditional PMO, focusing just on delivery, to actually linking back so you make sure that the organisation itself can achieve what it's trying to achieve.
So do you think the blocker there is that most PMOs feel like they don't know the they're not walking the shoes of those operational people, right? They're not doing the job that they're doing. They're not. Let's say you're kind of doing a transition and it's around a customer program. They're not doing the sales job right. So they kind of feel a little bit like a fraud or an imposter. So they don't necessarily know how to interact.
Yeah, and I don't think they think it's necessary.
Yeah,
I think it's in most regards over the years, I probably didn't think it was necessary, because when you think about projects, you think about delivery and that function, whatever you call it. You don't think about BAU operations unless you're a BA doing requirements with the operational teams. They're often quite neglected. I feel like the thing that I've identified the most, and particularly in the last 10 years, is that when you bring the operational people on board that journey, in any way, shape or form necessary, you're more likely to help your delivery teams get those outcomes. And so I think it's a lack of awareness that it's needed.
Yeah.
And I just think from a prioritization perspective, as a PMO, I'm often going to focus on delivery, because PMO delivery, like without delivery, there's no need for a PMO. But you don't realize that without getting the operational people on board, that program or project that's going to be eventually handed over to them may not be successful.
Yeah.
And I feel like PMO can be the glue that brings strategy, delivery and operations together, being that heart, being that sort of adaptive governance lens that sits in the middle.
Yeah, great. Okay. AI. Where are you on the adoption curve personally?
So I have been seeing it sort of shift over the last few years. The area that I'm seeing most is in the portfolio project management tools in the PPM space. There was quite a few tools 10 years ago that had some AI elements in it, and now it's almost every tool in the market has it. I feel like it's definitely an opportunity for experimentation, and it's definitely something I'm experimenting with as well. It's definitely injected in a lot of the tools we use day to day, the software programs we use day to day to run the business. I think it's definitely continuously being refined in some of those, and how it's being used and maturing. One of the things I'm really excited about lately is there is this whole Microsoft AI agents that's been. So I'm early days in looking into it, but I feel like there's opportunities for PMOs to leverage that in their business, in their teams, day to day. We're definitely going to leverage it in our business. And I think it's just experimenting. So there's so many tools out there. One of the things we've done is sort of we pick maybe 1 or 2 tools a month, and we'll just play around with it and explore it and of see how it works. And so we've got Microsoft AI, the agents, and then we've got another one at the moment we're playing around with, which is Airtable Portals. It's a product that we use that's got all this AI injected in it. So it's just like learning and experimentation. By no means an AI expert, but understanding that there is things out there that can maybe streamline the way that we work, and trying to bring them in. But the challenge is, in all these large corporate environments, you have to go through loophole after loophole to bring them in.
Yeah, of course.
So I've got the opportunity as CEO of AMO to bring them in tomorrow and start playing with them.
Yeah.
And then taking those insights and lessons and sharing them with clients. So I'm kind of going the other way with it. But yeah, I'm very curious. It will probably even the playing field in some respects. But one of the things I sort of talk a lot about lately is people talk about it helping from a content perspective, but without providing the context of your experience, you're not really going to get that far. So I think that's something people need to think about.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's not. I think my experience, I see people using it like Google. Right, yes. They're not investing in prompts, or they're not really investing in the power behind it.
Yes,
it's almost too basic. They're not really kind of getting much difference to Google. That's a generalization, by the way, but I think I've kind of got this idea in my head that AI, if we get AI right in some of the tools, and it can take away some of the heavy lifting, it actually creates greater opportunity for people with high EI. And I think PMO and the world of change and so forth is about emotional intelligence. It's about the way that you interact with people, the human experience, the conversations. And if we can take away some of the kind of the heavy lifting, the admin burden, because of some of these tools that are coming in theory, it should mean that we get more of that relationship building
100%.
And outcome. So I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm just that's the bit that excites me.
Yeah, definitely.
I think about us as a recruitment business. I don't want to be doing screening and stuff like that with AI. That's a human behavior, but there's other things that we can do that gives us 30% time efficiency to talk to more people and help them with their resume.
Yes.
Help them think about their career journey, help them think about their next role. it's going to make us better at what we do and more impactful.
Oh, for sure.
And that's the bit that excites me, I think.
And I think from a project-specific perspective, what I'm seeing that I'm really enjoying sort of evolving more is like that sentiment analysis. So I'm sort of seeing that embedded in some tools. So I'm seeing it on when project managers are completing their project status reporting, for example, and you're running this sort of sentiment analysis. You can kind of see just based on the tone of what they're writing, how they're ranking in terms of like keywords and things like that. So I think that's really interesting. But then on the flip side, I've also seen some instances of AI being used where the information in there wasn't correct, and then that information's gone out into the world, and then people have been sort of really hung out to dry because of it. So I just think people should not just rely on it completely, and this goes back to why I say you can write as many things as you want, but if you can't back it up when you're having those emotional conversations, then you'll get caught out.
Well, it's an opportunity to amplify, right? And if you put the wrong thing in, the wrong thing gets amplified.
Exactly.
If you put the right thing in, then the other way around, I guess. Hey, the sentiment analysis thing's really interesting as well. We were playing around with a couple of tools last year, and we were using this tool called Read AI. Okay. There's tons of other ones, right? I'm not advocating for them in any stretch, but it was interesting. We would do a Teams call, and at the end it would summarize the call.
Yep.
But it would also tell me how engaged was each person, how much time did each person talk, did that person make the right body language reactions to a conversation or not. So there's kind of that kind of visual sentiment analysis as well. And we played with it a bit, and it was quite interesting. And then we actually switched it off because we didn't really know where the data was going or what was going on with it. And I was given a few kind of alerts or think about this. And that's the hard thing, right? I think you're right. The opportunity as a small, medium business is you haven't got all these layers of hierarchy to get something signed off.
Yes.
You can just do something and play with it, right?
Yes.
But the flip side is you don't have a cybersecurity expert who's sitting there saying, well, did you know this?
Yes.
And that's now doing that through your system. So I think the biggest opportunity is for small business, and you can level the playing field with bigger organizations through this stuff. But it's kind of how we assimilate that around. And
using it responsibly. So we wouldn't put any confidential data or anything client related into our system, like into AI systems, because you're right, you don't know where the data's going. Atlassian released some really good AI responsible principles and things that they sort of promote. But you talk to a lot of law firms. I was speaking to a lawyer the other day, and we were talking about AI and sort of how that data is protected. Like AI itself is not protected because it's not a person. And so it's really about trying to understand that. And I think at the moment globally there's some work being done around how that's going to work. And I think that'll affect what we do in business as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I was talking to someone, actually the guy we had on the show yesterday is kind of in that space. He's an AI expert. And he was talking about ethical AI, the fact that there's a huge amount of bias. It replicates human behavior on scale, right? So if humans are biased, AI is biased. And you need to be able to think those things. So I feel like we're all on a cusp, right, of a big learning journey.
Yes.
And you can kind of run away from it or run towards it, I think. And it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to see what it does for in this kind of space going forward as well. I saw that you worked with Coles, or you work with Coles as a PMO coach.
Yes.
And within that, you've kind of got your own AMO method.
Yes.
I'm not sure how much you can elaborate on that, how much that is confidential, but I was sort of interested how you went about developing that.
So Coles is one of our biggest customers. I'm actively doing work with them at the moment, and we've been working with them for quite a few years. The whole concept started when a post demerger, so they had a public demerger quite a few years ago, and then there was a need to go in and help them in a number of capacities there. And so sort of the elements of PMO coaching stemmed from some of the work we'd been doing in previous clients. And that whole AMO way, AMO method was the formal name we used. The AMO way is the name, refined name now, is the concept I mentioned earlier, where I emphasize the importance of linking strategy, delivery and operations. So with them and any other customer, regardless of whether it's a project, a PMO, a transformation, a regulatory compliance program, it doesn't matter what it is, I'm always going to emphasize and using the AMO way concept, which takes us through a series of steps. And those series of steps are start with that discovery, which enables us to have those conversations. And we've got some automations in that process now to enable us to kind of capture that information, map it to key themes, and then use those key themes to make recommendations to the clients as to what they're to do moving forward. And so through that process, we've developed is a way to bring strategy. So what is it that, what is it that the client's trying to achieve? What are their goals? What are the strategic drivers? What is the timelines? All of those sorts of things. And then making sure that translates then into delivery. And then the delivery, the handover process into operations. How does that process work? Where is the disconnect? And why is there, projects that are not being delivered effectively or being handed over? Or maybe the embedment piece is missing. And then helping the operations team to then realize those benefits back to strategy. So having that holistic picture is fundamentally what the AMO way drives. So if I simplify it in a sentence, we help companies identify change and execute it. And that change could be anything from the lanyard problem to they need to bring in a new ERP system, whatever it might be. But usually it's really micro changes. And those micro changes, think of it like the Atomic Habits concept, which is a book I love, is just that micro changes, those like little incremental things that add up and make a significant shift for the business.
Yeah, amazing. Do you think as a kind of consulting practice, it's important you've got your way, the AMO way, as a product to differentiate?
Yes and no. So we've got one and it's great and I think it works really well. The reason I'd say no sometimes as well is often when you go into an organization, they have a way of working. And so you don't want to be restricted by your way. So when I go into a client site, and I've learned this the hard way, early on in the business, we might start the conversation by, we've got this way of working, and it's overwhelming for them. So they don't need to know that unless they ask you for something or some guidance. And so I've had clients who've said, can you tell us a way of working? And then we'll introduce the AMO way. But then there's other clients that have their ways of working. And if I start talking to them about our way, they're going to be overwhelmed and not interested. So we will just adapt. And the part of the AMO way is adaptability. And we'll adapt to your environment for what you need. And if you've got gaps, we'll plug those gaps for you.
Yeah, interesting. But it's good to have up your sleeve, right?
For sure.
Because I think in consulting, you're kind of trading off of knowledge, right? And I think sometimes unless you can articulate exactly what does that look like, and people often love a plan.
Yes.
Right, as in there's something concrete they can see, they can look at, and we experience that in recruitment. We rock up and they want to know, well, what's your sourcing plan? How are you going to find these people? What does that look like? And you're right, some of our clients have a talent acquisition process and they want us to collaborate and slot within it, and others say, tell us how you want to run this process.
Exactly.
So we've again very similar. We've developed a kind of methodology around hiring that we're flexible over, but we try to work with our clients around.
And just on that, like the adapting to the client environment, the bigger the client, the more likely they're going to be like, don't tell us your way. They're not going to care. But the smaller clients typically say, can you teach us? Can you show us? Yeah. And so one of the things that underpins the AMO way is we've got our capability in a box marketplace. And so a client might ring up and say, hey, we've got a problem in risks or dependencies or issues or change. So a specific problem that we can lift and shift a solution for them. Yeah. And then in other instances, they've got their solution, but it's not working, so we'll plug the gaps there. But so I do think it's good to have, and we use it every day, but the versatility that I like about what we do is the fact that it does actually support any size industry, any size company, any industry. And I think that's the versatility that's key in whatever model a company has in place.
Yeah, great. I think I said to you earlier, I kind of refer to you as the PMO paratrooper. You're like the Navy SEAL of getting in and getting things done, right? So you go in, typically it's short, impactful contracts. Sometimes not short, but they've got kind of definition around what they do. How do you go into those situations and set yourself up for success?
So it all starts back to discovery. Which is the first stage. So I've had many clients who have sort of said, oh, we don't have time for you to run this discovery thing that you talk about. Discovery could be a day, could be up to 2 weeks, whatever. I've had, for example, I was working with a CIO who is an ex-Big Four consultant, and he's like, oh, we've done this, like we don't really need that. And I was just saying, without me doing that, without us doing that, we cannot get you the outcome that you need to achieve. And so then we convince them that it's the right thing to do. And it usually is, well, it always is, because we get the outcomes. So we start with the discovery process.
So would you walk away if somebody said they don't want to do the discovery?
It depends on what the project is, but there has been instances, yes, where without seeking that data objectively, not using, Johnny's perspective on what's going on, because they're going to be biased on their perception of their organisation.
Yeah.
It makes it really challenging for us to get the results. So our way of working has been proven to work in so many instances that it's almost foolproof now, and it feels like it would make sense to just remove a step of the process if the process works.
Yeah.
So yes, I definitely have had some instances like that. And so that's the first part of it. And through that, we identify a series of observations. And usually what happens is we actually say to the clients that we want to speak to, give us your org chart, and we're going to pick who we're going to speak to. And you'll get pushback because they'll go, oh, no, talk to this person. No. The whole process is anonymous and objective. So we choose who we want to speak to. And we usually go by role titles, and maybe we don't know anything else about the person or the persons. So we use that. And then we map the observations to our key themes. And we've got a specific way of asking questions, a series of questions in a certain way, depending on the scope of the work. And then we map them to key themes. The key themes then are tied to capabilities, which is the ability to do whatever it is that we're trying to do. And then we help them define a roadmap for moving forward. And the reason it's so different is because effectively we're crowdsourcing information from their teams, not coming in as a consultancy and just telling them what to do. There's a big difference there. And so having that come in, having the resource availability, having the capability marketplace available, having the ability to use the past experience to drive those outcomes makes a big difference for clients. And so we do get repeat engagement. ANZ is a good example where the 4 or 5 times I've worked there in the last 20 years have always been something different. And the last time we were there, it was bridging the gap between, we've got like this really large program and we're trying to do it in an agile way, but the business operational team don't understand agile. So how do we connect the two together? And so again, we'll run through the process that I just described, but the themes and the capabilities and the problems we'll address are very different. So it's kind of a sequential process, and I've tried it now every engagement pretty much for the last 10 years. And that sort of recipe continuously works.
So it's kind of proactively grabbing the ball by the horn, so to speak, and saying that this is what we're here to do. Let's discover it. Let's not hide anything. Let's make sure everyone's aligned around expectations. And let's go forward, right? Yes. And let's keep checking in, right? And I think that's, anyone who goes in even to a contract, they're not setting up their own consultancy, but they go into a day rate contract as a BA or a project manager or a developer. The same works, right?
Yep.
When you arrive, it's making sure everyone's clear on why you're there, what the problem is, what you're there to solve, what you're there to fix, and making sure the right people are aligned to measure that success with you.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just the people you're reporting to or that manages you. It's actually taking the time to think about those that are in the broader scope of your remit.
So, PMO is a career, right? That's not really spoken about. I look at my kids and they're starting to think about what they want to do with their life and stuff like that. The word PMO would never, right, didn't feature in your lexicon until probably early 20s. So someone wanted to go towards this career, where would you tell them to start? If you could roll back the clock and you kind of thought, if only I'd started like that.
I do think that having an administrative foundation makes a big difference. And so whether that's a IT administrator, a finance administrator, sales administrator, some sort of administrative skill set, I think really does help because it's fundamental to the foundation of any good PMO, is that sort of administrative nature, although a small part of it. So I think from that perspective, I feel like that was the right step. And then it's adding a layer of project. So most people ask me, how do I get project experience? No one wants to hire me. And you probably get this all the time. People are looking for project experience when hiring. So you can get project experience through volunteering. You can get project experience by running your own projects at home, whether it's, setting up a birthday party or a wedding. Like they're projects. Just research what projects mean and try to apply it yourself. Attending meetups and listening to podcasts like this and other things like that to actually start to garner that experience. I think adding that project on top of that administration layer is important. Then you've got the ability to decide whether you're going to hone in on a specific area of PMO, and that is resourcing, financials. If you've come from a finance team, you're probably going to be more closely aligned to a finance analyst type PMO role. If you are someone who loves that strategic, big picture thinking, you might be really good in the scheduling realm. So you kind of decide if there is a particular area of PMO that you want to go into, and depending on where you've come from, you might suit one or more of those. And then it's about figuring out how you're going to get some of those leadership skills. And so leadership skills doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a team, but you could be the PMO lead and be a single person. But you're leading stakeholders, you're leading outcomes, etc. So it's figuring out how you're going to get that skill set and bring that in. And I feel like in that sort of 3 steps, I would significantly recommend to get as much project management exposure that you can, shadowing other PMs, buddying up with more senior people, joining a Centre of Excellence group in your organisation if they've got them, setting something up if it doesn't exist, and even taking the initiative of running sort of an event or something where you can apply those project management skills. So I think those things together would really help. But administration is probably where I would start at the very minimum, with maybe an emphasis on a specialty skill set area, and then just have a love for governance, because that's core to what we do.
Yeah, right. Good. Okay, thank you. We're going to mix it up a bit now, actually. I'm going to ask you, I don't know if you've seen our lightning round.
No, I haven't.
And I haven't prepared you for
nervous?
This. You should be very nervous.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, no, you shouldn't.
Just don't ask me a maths question or something that requires memory.
No. So these, so I've never worked at Crown, right? I say it every time I'm not a croupier. So pick 3 at random, and then I'm going to ask you to flip them over, read them out, and answer the question. And it could be anything.
Oh, I'm going to go, yeah. Okay. Dog person or cat person? Dog.
Do you have a dog?
I have 2.
Yeah.
I have a Boston Terrier, who's the best breed dog you can ever have. And we've got a really annoying sausage dog that we got as a friend for him.
Yeah, right.
Don't recommend him.
I hear that they get back issues and things.
Oh, she's got a not hemorrhoid. She's got a intestinal problem at the moment. Apparently it's genetics, and she cries all day, and she's really annoying. And if it wasn't for him, she probably would be going back to my sister where we adopted her.
Yeah, right. There you go. Okay.
Early bird or night owl? Early bird. So I was saying with a 1-year-old, the only time I can work is when she's sleeping. So I'm usually up about 5 o'clock in the morning most days and tired by the end of the night. So sleeping early.
Have you always been an early bird?
No, never.
Never?
No, business changed that. So business, I had to get things done before the team was awake and starting to ping you with questions. So definitely early bird.
Yeah, okay.
What do you often do when you feel stuck? It's a good one. So I'd probably say that one of the best things I do in a therapeutic, relaxing, you'll probably appreciate this, is I go for a massage. It's my sort of 1 hour of alone time. It's de-stressing, and it's time where I actually do a lot of thinking, believe it or not. And because I don't have anything to fidget with, I seem to have a lot more ideas, and then I just have to remember to write them down when I get up. But I feel like that's where I would start, and just disconnect from the computer, from the phone, everything, go for a massage, and I feel just it centers me and helps me feel more refreshed.
Yeah, interesting. There's I read a brilliant book over Christmas that I was recommended called Rest.
Okay.
And the guy kind of unpacks all the case studies over history about how people have been effective leaders and scientists and all different fields, arts, music, everything, but how they prioritize rest, but proper mindful rest and things like that, like you just said, where you're taking away all the distractions. They often say, people have the best ideas in the shower.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because they've got, hopefully they're not on their phone.
Yes.
So if you want a book recommendation, check it out, because I read it over Christmas and I definitely changed a lot of my working habits at the start of this year. I feel like I'm drifting back to old habits really quickly at the moment, but I probably need to refresh myself with some of the ideas, because it was pretty interesting.
I think it's 100% priority sleep for sure. With a baby, it's a bit hard at the moment, so it's not by choice but by design. But I emphasize with that. I was reading something this morning. Stephen Bartlett was talking about he's got some measurements and things like that around his sleep, so he'll start his day later if he doesn't get the right amount of sleep. And so I think having that flexibility is critical, which is another reason why working for yourself also helps.
Well, we want to be the optimum version of ourselves.
For sure.
And anyone that employs people want their employees to be the optimum version.
Sure.
And people can impact that and help that, right? But it's interesting just to tune into that a bit more. And I think that's one of the things I discovered from this book. And I realized when I work from home, I start taking a break at lunchtime. I do a workout, refresh in the middle of the day, not just keep chipping through the emails and thinking I'll do that at 5 o'clock.
For sure.
Come back, I'm energized, I have some food, I refuel. But it's interesting, just more different ways you can get rest other than just sort of sleeping or watching Netflix.
Yeah, exactly. Which each their own, everyone has their own thing that they do. Mine happens to be that.
I've got a couple other random questions for you.
Okay.
What are you most proud of in your career?
There's definitely a few that come to mind, but I think it's probably the fact that I didn't get into university, and I don't have an MBA or any of that sort of stuff. And I had sort of the I guess, fearlessness to give things a go, and doing so have been able to make a huge amount of opportunities and meet people and really just push past those boundaries. So I think the fearlessness to just give it a go is something I don't think is easy to come by, and it's taken time, but that's probably helped me think I could do things that maybe I didn't think I could do, but I would probably say that.
Yeah, because it's interesting, isn't it? Like, we hear these kind of quotes about, about being fearless and about putting yourself out there and taking risks and all this kind of stuff, but actually doing it, conceptually everyone gets that. They're reading, that makes sense, I should do more things, but doing it is a different matter.
Oh, for sure.
And that's my kind of take from our conversation today, is you're relentlessly putting yourself out there and testing yourself, which I think, you should be proud of that. That's an incredible achievement.
I think you would appreciate there's a whole history of anxiety that underpins everything that I've had for most of my adult life. And so the fear for me is the fake events appearing real concept. And so doing that and seeing people like yourself make those sorts of comments, and other people that I look up to make comments like that, it's really heartwarming, because it means that the work is not going unnoticed. So I appreciate that feedback, and hopefully anyone else listening that has their own, challenges around anxiety as well can think that, like, it's just fake events appearing real, and don't let that hold you back.
I read something once, and it said anxiety. If you're suffering anxiety, you're living in the future.
Yeah.
And if you're suffering depression, you're probably living in the past.
Yes.
And it's trying to find, how do you live more in the present?
Yes.
Is the kind of, and that's not easy, and a lot of people struggle with this stuff, and there's no simple answer to that.
No.
But it's a really good frame of reference often, I think, when you're kind of feeling something. Am I worried about something that's going to happen ahead of me or behind me here?
100%.
How am I trying to work through those things?
Yeah, and our thoughts are notoriously inaccurate, so don't believe everything you think.
I say this all the time to people. If you spoke to other people how we often speak to ourselves internally, we wouldn't like ourselves very much.
100%, right? I agree with that. Yeah.
So there's also a bit of self-care that needs to be practiced as well.
Definitely.
Do you have any career regrets?
I probably have plenty. There was probably one example where I think I said yes too quickly to a role that I probably shouldn't have said yes too quickly for. And I think I mentioned, growing up in a really strict family, we didn't really have, like, traveling alone and things like that weren't things that I would do. And also I didn't have the stomach for traveling alone. It was an anxiety of mine early on in my career. And so I accepted a role that I knew would require travel, and I wasn't able to commit to it.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was something that I still till now feel like I wish I didn't say yes. I was so eager and excited to do a good job, but then not knowing that I couldn't commit to all of the travel side of it, I think made a mistake, was a mistake. And then also just another one that I just wrote about a couple of days ago was I said yes to do a workshop and speak at an event. I was so excited. But at that time, about 15 years ago, I hadn't had any experience or life experience to actually be able to run that successfully. And I should have thought through that a bit better. And I had a most horrendous workshop experience of my life that I wanted to set off the fire alarms in the building at the Melbourne Exhibition Centre because I just didn't want to be there anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'd probably say that was one of my other big ones that holds tight in my mind.
But it's interesting, isn't it? That those mistakes stay with us, right?
Yeah.
And there's some learning from that. And in the moment, it feels horrible, right? It feels awful.
Huge.
But you learn, you grow, you develop. You probably, no doubt, unconsciously beyond that moment, thought twice before you said yes to something and decided, am I ready for this? Made you maybe think about your fears around travel and so forth, and maybe try to overcome them so it wasn't a block in the future. So
exactly.
There's always learning from those things. And I think if we're learning, I can't tell you what you can and what you can't regret, but you almost shouldn't regret stuff if you've become better because of it.
Yes.
I think.
I agree with you completely. I mean, they're the moments that you think, and that time you felt so horrible, feeling like I'm emotionally distraught by the situation. and they stick true in your mind, but the learnings that have come and the things that have happened since then, it probably just shines a light on the fact that if that didn't happen, maybe it would have taken longer to learn the lesson, or maybe I wouldn't have learnt it at all. So yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's definitely a highlight of the positive side of that.
Yeah, and those moments were going to come along at some point.
Yeah.
Right, and you're going to kind of suddenly find yourself where you can say, oh, okay, I'm out of my depth here.
Exactly.
And what does that mean? Am I going to pull back from this or not? We've talked a bit about feedback. And, I believe that people are shaped by the feedback that they receive throughout their career. So I'm always interested to ask this question. What's the most significant feedback you've received?
Interesting. Depends on what sort of phase in my career, I guess. I think probably seems obvious, but I get told I'm very detailed. And I think that's that perfectionism nature that's underpinned from my anxiety, which I think you'll appreciate. That means you want to give more, because you hope that the more will address every single objection that someone might have about the something. But as my career evolved, I realised that that's too much for sort of an executive audience. And so I had to evolve over the last 10 years or so to be able to hone in on the kind of key points and not be emphasising everything and putting everything that's in my mind out there, whether it's through speaking and telling people and talking about it, or through writing or producing something. So I get told I'm very detailed, and that comes across in sometimes when I'm speaking or preparing things or doing work as one of the big things for me that I've had to learn to kind of hone in on. And it's still a challenge sometimes because you're so excited but you want to put everything out there. Yeah. But I don't think that's ideal, especially as a busy CEO, which you would know. Yeah. You can't be in the detail for everything all the time, because then it means you're doing 80-hour weeks, and that's not healthy for anyone. So.
But it's also one of those things that can become de-energizing for yourself and for other people.
Yes.
Right, particularly when, say, you're trying to get the momentum going around a project, and then you kind of go, well, hang on a second, I just want to go through the finer detail.
Yes.
So sometimes you just need to the action, right, exactly. For things, and that can wait.
Exactly.
But it's also important to you. It's been your strength. Right, understanding the detail and the importance of detail, because it's still critical, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you're trying to say. Again, it's a lot about balance. And
for sure, there's a time and a place for it. Like, you need the detail to be able to inform the decisions you're going to make. But do I need to tell whoever it is all the detail all at the same? It can be quite overwhelming. So it's like balancing the key messages, which is something that you learn as well in the PMO and the audience that you're dealing with, what messages they need. So it's like not just in case information, but just in time. So it's the information that you may need, as opposed to trying to spend all this time creating information and confusion and complexity. And it's something you learn. I think that's the biggest shift for me from a generic PMO level person through to an executive PMO director head of, is being able to balance that. So I struggle with that, and I think that's one of my weaknesses still.
I think that there's a really great psychological model called Hogan.
Okay.
Hogan's personality types, and it talks about a bunch of strengths that you can have. Attention to detail being probably one of those. Charisma could be another one of those. Like there's a whole bunch, and you look at those and kind of think, they're all strengths that people have that are very successsul. But what Hogan talks about, which I really love, is that once you're maybe using that above an 8 out of 10, it's actually becoming a weakness. So someone that's highly charismatic, if they're a 10 out of 10 on charisma, is probably being quite manipulative.
Yeah.
Or someone that's really great with detail, when they get to a 10 out of 10, is probably stressed, and they're probably stressing other people.
Yes.
And losing the room. And I love that model, because it's, there's not this kind of chase to be a 10 out of 10 for everything.
Yes.
It's saying find your 80%,
Yeah.
because that's when you're going to be in your sweet spot.
I like that. I haven't heard of the Hogan one. I've seen all of some of the other sort of personality profile reports. Like, we usually run them in our teams as well, like the DISC one and some others. But I think that's a good point, because if you're always, like I like to say, even in general, in projects, programs, everything we do, people often refer to best practice, but best means it's 10 out of 10. There's no improvement. I like to say proven practice, because it's proven to work, it's proven to drive results, but there's still opportunity to improve. And so I think it's the same in ourselves. Like, I don't think I'll ever get best at anything, no matter how hard I try. I think it's just getting to a point where, like you said, 80% is enough, and just building up the other weaknesses.
I heard, and it was definitely on a podcast somewhere, maybe High Performance Podcast, Carl Lewis, the sprinter. If you remember Carl Lewis back from the probably late 90s, early 2000s. And he said his secret to success is that he was a 100-meter sprinter. He ran 85% of his capacity. And his logic was that every other sprinter goes out the blocks at 100%. And by the 70-meter mark, they're gassed.
Yeah.
Right? They've got nothing left in the locker.
Yes.
And those last 30 meters is just almost momentum.
Yes.
Whereas if he's at 85%, he can sustain that for 100 meters.
Yes.
Also, those last 30 meters, if he's got to give a little bit more, he's left it in reserve to give a bit more.
Yes. Yes.
And that was his secret to success, is kind of the 85% maximum effort.
I like that. I think that can be applied in so many ways and so many instances. I love that one. I've heard that before. I think I remember, but and then you wonder, how does he do it? But I mean, that's why they're elite sports people.
Well, that's the training, that's the conditioning, and you learn, and you really focus in on that skill. And again, it's a great concept.
Yes.
Probably, the reality of that, who knows the application.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Look, my last question kind of around this stuff is, if you were giving a sort of singular piece of sage advice to the next generation, what would it be?
Be curious. I think be curious in every way, shape or form. And just, it doesn't matter how far up the ladder you get from a corporate perspective, how senior, how busy you are, whether you decide to pursue a business path, just be curious. Yeah. I think that'll take you very far. Yeah,
awesome. Curiosity, what are you reading? What are you listening? Stephen Bartlett, obviously, Diver, so I know you listen to that, but
yes.
What else are you reading or listening to that's inspiring you at the moment?
So I just recently, I mentioned before, but I read Atomic Habits. Read that a few times over. I think it's just so impressively written and powerful. I'm listening to Masters of Scale, which is a Reid Hoffman podcast.
Yeah.
And then there's another podcast, I can't remember the exact title, but by Guy Raz. I think it's called How I Built This. This. Obviously very fascinated in the business space and how that's happening and what's going on in there. So they're probably the ones I'm thinking about. And then there's a few psychology books on anxiety. So I'm reading one called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which is really interesting, actually. It's just all about stress and how to avoid it, and it talks back about the savannah and how zebras themselves, they don't get the things that we get. We get stress, we get ulcers and other things like that. So it's just really interesting just to help to mitigate the stress that comes from being busy and running, your own business and doing all these things, being a new mum, being proactively on top of it. And so I like to balance the fiction and the non-fiction.
Yeah, great. If you like Atomic Habits, I got a great recommendation, which is a book by a guy called Charles Duhigg.
Okay.
Again, he's been on Stephen Bartlett, I'm sure of it. He did a book called Super Communicators, which is mind-blowing. But he's got another book that's great called The Power of Habit. And if you love detail, it takes Atomic Habits and it kind of goes to the next level of detail.
Okay.
So both his books are awesome, but The Power of Habit is really interesting.
I've got to check that out. Sounds good.
Look, thank you for your time today. I feel like I've learned so much about PMO, learned a lot about you as well, and your incredible story. And we said it earlier, but you should be really proud of what you've achieved, because I think you've built a great business, you've built a great brand around who you are and what you stand for. I think you're pretty uncompromising in knowing who you are, which I think is a real strength.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to see kind of where you go next and what you do.
Thank you, and great interviewing, by the way. I'm very impressed.
Thank you, cheers. Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Emmbr, that's EMMBR LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.